You know that feeling, right? You've just sat through a big strategy meeting, and you walk out thinking, wait, what did we actually decide? Yeah, we've all been there. So today, we're going to dive into Richard Rumelt's classic good strategy slash bad strategy to figure out what a real strategy looks like and why so much of what we call strategy is, well, just noise. All right, let's just get right into it. The word strategy gets thrown around all the time. But the truth is, most of what passes for strategy isn't strategy at all. It's usually just a bunch of fancy buzzwords and wishful thinking. A plan that, honestly, is going to lead you absolutely nowhere. You know, Rumelt tells the story that is just painfully familiar. He talks about a corporate retreat with a huge, grand vision. There was cheering, there was a balloon release, but there was no actual plan. It was all performance, pure theater, not strategy. And that right there points to a massive, massive problem in how we think about planning. And this brings us to a pretty provocative question. What if all those fluffy mission statements and grand ambitions are just a cover-up for not having a real strategy at all? This isn't just about semantics, you know? It's a fundamental flaw that can and often does lead directly to failure. So how do we fix this? Well, the first step is you've got to learn how to spot the problem. And luckily, Rumelt gives us a few really clear warning signs, what he calls the hallmarks of bad strategy. So let's just walk through them. Okay, so the very first sign of a bad strategy is something Rumelt calls fluff. You know exactly what this is. It's those mission statements that are just packed with jargon and buzzwords. They're designed to sound impressive, but really they're just a smokescreen hiding a total lack of substance. And I'm not kidding. This is a real-world example. Instead of just saying cloud computing, an official report actually described it with this word salad. I mean, come on, this is pure 100% fluff. The second hallmark is a huge one. It's failing to actually face the challenge. Look, a strategy at its heart is just a way to solve a problem. If you can't, or maybe you won't, define what that problem is, then there is no way you can create a good strategy to overcome it. It's impossible. So, take a look at the story of International Harvester. They were pouring tons of money into shiny new equipment, but their whole plan completely ignored the elephant in the room. Or in their case, the elephant in the elevator. Their labor relations were an absolute disaster, and that was the real problem. By failing to diagnose the true challenge, their so-called strategy just led them straight to collapse. Now, the third, and maybe the most common sign of bad strategy, is mistaking your goals for your strategy. Shouting, "We're going to grow revenue by 20%. Well, that's not a strategy. That's a wish. Your strategy isn't the goal itself. It's the smart, coherent plan for how you're actually going to get there. And believe me, the stakes for making this mistake can be enormous. Back in 2006, Lehman Brothers' strategy was just to take on more risk than anyone else. That wasn't a plan. It was just a really, really dangerous goal. And we all know how that story ended, don't we? This is the real-world cost of bad strategy. Okay, so we've spent some time tearing apart bad strategy. So what does good strategy actually look like? Well, thankfully, Rumelt gives us this wonderfully simple but incredibly powerful framework he calls the kernel. The kernel has just 3 parts. That's it. First, a diagnosis, which is all about figuring out what's really going on. Second, a guiding policy, which is your overall approach to the problem. And third, a set of coherent actions, the specific things you're going to do. Diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent actions. Simple, right? The diagnosis is all about getting clear. You know, business and life are incredibly complex. A good diagnosis just cuts through all of that fog and identifies the one critical issue that absolutely has to be solved. Next up is the guiding policy. This is the how. It's not a super detailed to-do list. It's more like, think of it like the guardrails on a highway, right? They don't tell you exactly where to steer, but they keep you from flying off the road and they channel you in the right general direction. And finally, we have coherent actions. This is the what, the specific stuff you're actually going to do. And listen, that word coherent is the key. These actions aren't just a random laundry list. They have to work together. They have to reinforce each other to make that guiding policy a reality. Okay, I know this can still feel a little bit abstract.
So let's use a really simple, practical example from the book to see this whole kernel thing in action.
So let's meet Stephanie. She owns a quarter store, and she is getting absolutely crushed by a new supermarket. She realizes she just can't compete on price. That's her diagnosis. So she has to make a hard choice. Does she try to serve the price-conscious students or the time-crunch professionals? She decides to go all in on the professionals, and that choice becomes the heart of her new strategy. So her guiding policy is simple. Be the most convenient stop for busy professionals. And from that simple idea, look at these coherent actions that just flow naturally. She adds an express checkout for that 5 p.m. rush. She starts stocking high-quality, ready-to-eat meals. She even cuts her late-night hours because those were only for the students anyway. See, every single action supports the others, all to serve her one target customer. Now that is good strategy. Now, let's look at the opposite. Crown Core Conceal. This company had a brilliant, focused strategy serving a very specific niche market. But then a new CEO comes in and the strategy just becomes get bigger through acquisitions. This is a classic example of mistaking a goal for a strategy, and in the process, they throw away the very thing that made them successful in the first place. And the result? Well, it speaks for itself. Just look at this chart. As the rest of the market climbed, Crown's stock price went into an absolute nosedive. They destroyed so much value by trading a coherent, smart strategy for just a simple-minded goal of growth for growth's sake. The evidence is right there in black and white. So, what's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean for us? The real power of the kernel is that it's a practical tool. It's something you can actually use to cut through all the confusion and create a real strategic advantage in your own work. This quote really just nails it. A good strategy feels like a secret weapon, not because it's super complicated or secret, but because it's just so rare. Real focus means you have to make hard choices, and most organizations will do anything to avoid that. That focus, that is the competitive advantage. So here's the bottom line. The next time you find yourself in a strategy discussion that's getting lost in fluff and buzzwords, just bring it back to the kernel. Ask these 3 simple questions. 1. What's our diagnosis of the real challenge? 2. What's our guiding policy to tackle it? And 3. What are the coherent actions we're actually going to take? And that really just leaves us with one final question for you. Think about your own work or a personal project, whatever it is. What is the single most critical challenge you are facing right now? And now that you know the difference between good strategy and bad, what's your real strategy to overcome it?